Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 395. Today we're going to talk about the Battle of 5 Armies, and this is the last battle at the end of The Hobbit. And so if you're not familiar with the movie or the books, at the end of the book there's a huge battle with a bunch of orcs on one side and the goblins and everything versus elves and humans and dwarves, kind of temporarily at least sort of forming an alliance to combat the darkness, so to speak. So if you're not familiar with War of the Ring, which is a game that kind of covers all of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, it has some similar mechanics to that. And let's just go ahead and jump into it. It's pretty much a straightforward, so to speak, battle game set in this Middle Earth universe. And then I'll come back and tell you what I think of it. Okay, here you can see just about everything that you get in the game. First, the main thing is the board, and it has these different locales from the books and the movies. You can see there's the Ruins of Dale. Over here, we've got Ravenhill. Right here, this is where Gandalf starts, and of course we've got the different little miniatures there. There's a nice little silver miniature of Gandalf. Any of the miniatures that are sort of a character of note are going to be in silver. And then we have sort of your generic elven spearmen here in blue. And then of course up here we have the front gate to the the Misty Mountain, and that's where some of the doors will start pouring out. Can't believe I said that. And then of course you can see the bad guys are all in red here. These are the shadow armies. You've got orcs and large orcs, like this is a great orc here. This is a good sized miniature versus, let's find a little mini orc here, a normal orc. You can see this guy here. And there's orcs and goblins, there's even bats, which are pretty neat, and all that kind of good stuff. The other thing to note on the board is this track, and this is the fate track here. And this is going to start moving up, and if it ever hits the end, then the good army wins. The humans and the dwarves and everything, they win. Now the other thing to note is some of these characters are not yet in play. You can see Bilbo here, for example, has a little spot. You'll put him, and then usually in the first turn or two, he's going to come into play once the fate marker moves up to his spot, and then you'll put him into play, and he's got some different special abilities. We have the Great Eagles here. We've got Bjorn, the bear person. And then we've got Thorin here, and then of course Bolg, which comes into play through some different conditions, and this is sort of the main special guy for the darkness. And you've also got different cards here to kind of tell you different things about the different characters. So you've got Bard here, he's already on the board, and this tells you where to put him and everything during setup. And then on the other side here, you've got their different special abilities, some little stats and things, and then you've got a spot here. And what the Free Peoples player will be doing is putting sometimes 1 to 3 tokens, depending on what they want to do for that turn, on these different leaders here. And this kind of sets the whole tone for the round, I should say. So you got Gandalf here, and you've got Thranduil, and Dain Ironfoot, who also starts on the board. You can see he's got different special abilities and so on. And then we also have some for the bad guys. So we've got Bolg here, as well as the giant bats, which are pretty interesting as well. And we've got some other types of cards. Now, the Shadow and the Free Peoples have their own sort of starting deck, and these are going to be in their hands. Now, these do a couple of things. So these will tell you what the Dwarven Regulars, there's a little picture of the model, the battle stats. This is a favored terrain, so they get a little bit of a bonus there. And then if you, in a series of rounds of combats, play this card, then you have some possibilities to activate some of the special abilities for the different units that could be being used in combat. And then everybody has a regroup card where you can kind of draw up cards that you've played, get them back in your hand, and then play them through further rounds. And these are also, you can play these if you want to retreat a little bit more favorably to yourself. And then players will also be drawing cards from a couple of decks here. This main deck, both players will be drawing from, and you can see each of these cards is dual purpose. And depending on what kind of dice you roll, what kind of things you can activate different parts of the card on the top part, and then the bottom part is always for battle. So similar to War of the Ring and also several other games, you have this sort of decision where it's sort of a pre-combat kind of thing, or special ability that will happen. You can make your turn a little bit cooler, or do I save it for the cool combat ability when I actually do get into combat? And as well, there are decks for each the Shadow and the Free People, and these have different special abilities and all that kind of stuff. And you can see again, there's different icons here. And the icons on both of these kinds of cards, you need to roll certain faces on these different dice, which we'll talk about in a minute, to let you activate these cards. There's also these fate cards which can happen, and these sometimes will get triggered. You can see by moving the fate track, sometimes these will come up. And these are usually checking for the free people. If a certain character is in play, then they're going to get a little bit of a buff and stuff. It's just kind of a little kind of flavorful random event kind of thing. They're not too crazy, but you know, they're pretty cool. It adds to the theme of the game for sure. I will say the rules over here are really well written, very clear. They're pretty thick, I would say, but they're definitely not overwhelming. I'm not going to cover every last detail because some of the detail is in, you know, timing of the cards and all that kind of stuff. The game does come with 2 player aids. They give you a turn breakdown, and then also they tell you what the different faces of the dice mean for both players. So each player will get a separate one of these, and then as players roll dice and they're going to get different options, they can see what's available to them. So before I talk about how the turn is going to work, there's a couple of things that are going to be the victory condition. So like I said before, if the fate marker gets all the way to the end, then the free people immediately win. Now the main way that the shadow players are going to win is if they take control of some of these different establishments, these different fortifications. So you can see we've got the camp and Ruins of Dale. So if the shadow player instead of the free people player was in there with some of their guys and they were controlling that spot, this would actually count as 2 victory points for the shadow player. Each of these spots would. Now there are some spots, if we look down here at Raven Hill, for example, you can see it's got the little triangle. And then if we go up here to Front Gate, it's also got a triangle. Now these here are, actually I should have called these fortifications, these other ones without the triangles are called settlements. Now these are worth 4 victory points if the shadow controls, and the regular settlements without the triangle are only worth 2. So if any time at the end of the turn shadow has 10 points worth of locations that they control, then they're going to win. So if they controlled this one, they'd have 6 points already for their 10. So all they would need, for example, would be Eastern Spur and then the Ruins of Dale possibly. So anytime they have 10 points worth of stuff at the end of the turn, shadow wins. Now there are 2 other ways for the free people to win. If this fate marker gets up to where Bjorn is, and the shadow player does not have at least 6 victory points worth of locations out on the board, then the free people will also immediately win. The other way the free people win is if they kill Bolg. If Bolg does come out into play and then the free people kill them, he's kind of like the the brains behind the operation, so to speak. So the game, as you can see, is really set up to be a race for the shadow player to get out and control and take over all this territory before this timer runs out. That's really the thrust of the entire game. Now let's go over a couple of steps of the turns. I'm not going to get into exhaustive detail, but this will give you a good idea what's happening. Now the first thing that players are going to do is draw 2 cards. You're going to draw 1 card from this common deck and then 1 from your respective faction deck. You do have a hand limit of 6 cards at any given time, so if you do have to draw more, then you've got to discard down to 6 as you do that. Then the free people are going to activate generals, and I said this kind of sets the tone for the round in a way. So if you look at here, Dane, it tells you where he is at setup. Now if I wanted to go ahead and activate him, I'll go ahead and put one of those tokens on there, and then now I have this ability that I can actually use this activation token later in the round or right before we get into the action phase and we're choosing the actions from our dice. So you can activate up to 3 of these, and then the shadow player can draw from this stack of face down fate tiles up to the number of generals that you activated as the free people's player. Now they can stop at any time if they wish. Now here you can see 2 of these. These actually aren't in the stack, but the players can do different abilities and get this into play and get these shuffled into the stack. And you can see the shadow player is 0 because they do not want the number on this fate tile to push the fate marker, because whatever number they end up with, that's how far the fate marker is going to move. So let's say these aren't in play and then you activated 2, so I'm going to draw that one. Okay, I could stop on the 3. I'm not going to do that because that's a big number. So I'll draw a second one and I'm stuck with whatever I'm left with. So I've drawn 2, so I'm going to move the fate marker 1 space. This actually gets shuffled back in. And then I'm also going to draw a fate card. If it has that symbol, you're going to draw a fate card. So we would move the marker 1 space on the track. And then remember I showed you over here this deck of cards right there, and I would flip a card up there. And at the beginning of the game, they don't really activate that much because a lot of the special characters from the Fate track are not yet in play. So, but as the time goes on, then some of those Fate activations can happen, and that's going to help the Free People's player. Now keep in mind that the generals that you activate here on the board are going to be able to do things a little bit easier, and that whatever units are with them, or you're going to be able to move those. You have a higher probability of moving those based on your action die rolls as well. Now at this point, the shadow player is actually going to put out some leadership tokens in some of the different zones where they have the units, and that's going to give them some leadership that they can use to activate those different groups, because the shadow player doesn't really have any generals. I guess you could call Bulg a general, but he's not even in play at the start of the game. So they're going to go ahead and do that, and they're going to do that usually 6, and sometimes they will get a 7th. But they start with 6 dice, and you do it per the number of dice you have. Now the other thing that the player can do is, instead of putting out a leadership token for each die that they have, they can also put out a bat. And so these bats are very interesting. These are, you'll have a card that you can play during combat where it'll activate the bat. And the bat actually is sort of not really involved directly with the combat, and you can put them in different zones. Now in the rulebook here, it gives you a little bit clearer picture of what some of the different areas are. You can see here, so we've got this sort of red zone here surrounded by the rivers, as well as this spot here with the mountains up there. So you can quickly see this. It's kind of hard to show it on video, but once you kind of know where the areas are, so you've got the sort of the plains area here, right? So you've got that area right there. The bat can actually, you place one bat in that, and it's going to kind of cover that whole territory there, and you'll be able to activate it with some card play during combat. So you can either put leader tokens out or bats. And then each player is simply going to roll the dice that they have allotted to them, and then this is going to sort of dictate the actions that they have available to them. So let's kind of look at some of these dice faces here. So here's some of the dice faces that you can roll, and as I said, the player aids, they show you the different faces. So here's the lidless eye. Here is the character dice. You can see it's basically the same icon for each player, but they show you the Free People and then the shadow token, and you get the same different actions that you can do from spending that die. So if you got a character action, you can do fast movement, move one of your armies with leadership. That could be a general or somebody with a leadership token, up to 2 regions, and those are the different zones here. So you can see there's one region there, and they could go 1, 2 and move through there. You can attack, which is basically move one region and then attack with a character die here. There's all kinds of different things you can do. Now some things you can do is you can spend these types of icons to draw more cards, play cards, and again, some of the cards require, for example, like this one requires a mustering die to play it. Now there are some icons here that allow you to play any card, but sometimes you're sort of trying to figure out, okay, well if I play the mustering die, I can activate this card, or I can take any number of the actions here associated with muster, recruiting, rallying, basically sort of healing up an army, if you will, or again playing a card that has that. So that's really the decision-making process of the game. It's like, okay, do I do one of these kind of standard things, kind of shore up some of my troops that have been depleted, play this really cool ability that's strictly better, so I should just go ahead and play it, or sometimes there's a tough decision based on the card play. Now the Free Peoples do have this Will of the West icon. You can see that there. That's sort of a wild, they can do whatever they want there. But for the most part, you're recruiting new troops, moving troops around, attacking troops, and so on. You do have a 4-unit limit, and that's any units in your color. So I can only have 4 blue guys in the same spot. Any of the silver characters don't count towards that limit, but they do enhance the units that they're with for sure. And the shadow player up here, you can see some of these spots here. You can see that icon right there. That's sort of a mustering spot where some of the different shadow units will come into play, and you can have as many as you want there. So that's kind of interesting, like they're just kind of pouring in through the plains there, and then you're sort of pulling off groups and moving them as they start to come into this main battle area there. Now you also have these goblin areas here. These have to actually fill up. So once this has 4 goblins, this little token here will actually break off, and then they can start pouring in. You can start dumping goblins in through the caves, and they can come in through the mountains. Now let's talk quickly about combat. So combat's very interesting. Let's say the shadow player had attacked the Free People's player here. You can see there's 3 wargs here, and then there's 1 great orc there, whereas there are 3 humans here, 3 men, and also Gandalf happens to be inside of here. So first thing you're going to check for is terrain superiority, and you can see these little icons on the different spots. Wherever the attack is happening place, in this case Dale, you're going to look at the cards for each of the different units, and whoever has the most units that have this icon on their card, then they're going to get the terrain superiority. And the side that has it actually draws an extra card, so they've got that sort of extra possible advantage from that card ability that they can use during combat. And then each player is going to take a card in their hand, and then they're going to put it face down. So we're attacking with warg, so maybe the shadow player would play with warg, and here you can see, you know, the type of terrain they favor. Obviously they like to run around the open, so they favored the plains. And then we see we have here the lakemen, and we can see they actually do favor the embattlement there. And then so maybe I would play this card, and then the shadow player would play the warg card, or maybe they would play the great orc card. And sometimes the special abilities and things will go off right then, or sometimes they'll rely on a condition to happen later that round of combat. And then everybody's going to roll dice here equal to the total combat value. So most everything is 1. The orcs actually are 2. So in this case, the shadow would roll 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the free people would roll 3. But you can see actually Gandalf here, he's got a 2 combat, and he's also got 1 leadership, which I'll talk about in a second. So they would actually roll 5 as well. So each side is going to roll 5, and then your 2 hit number is usually a 5 or a 6. So for every 5 or 6 that you roll, the other side is going to have to hurt one of their units. Now through card play, you can change that 2 hit number, raise and lower it. You can also change it based on the terrain. So you can see up here, you've got mountain slopes. If you're fighting up into a mountain slope, it becomes a 6. We can see that's an unbroken fortification there. If that hadn't been broken yet, then it would have to roll a 6. Now after you roll, you can re-roll any dice up to the amount of your leadership value. So right now, each side has a leadership. They've got a leadership token, and the free peoples have a leadership value of 1 there because of Gandalf. Now they can also get leadership tokens through some other different abilities and stuff as well. So they could each re-roll 1 die right now. And then you're going to actually apply damage, and this is a very different way of doing it. So let's say we had to take 2 damage as the free people, and then the other side, free people rolled really good, and so they would have to actually take, let's say, 4 damage on the shadow side. So you actually put these damage tokens on and with the group there. Now you can, if you want, voluntarily resolve casualties, and for each unit that you remove, you actually will remove 2 damage markers. But you must do this if you have damage markers greater than the number of units. So right now we're pretty good because we've got 2 markers here, and there's 3 units, so they don't have to do it. Remember, Gandalf doesn't actually count as a unit. And then we also have 4 markers here and 4 units there as well. So we could, if we want, remove warg, and then this would remove 2 of these. We would only have 2 there, and so on. I don't usually find that you do that on purpose. You usually kind of just wait for the mandatory to increase, but there have been sometimes an instance where you'll do it. And the other thing is, as you move this group, you need to move at least as much damage tokens with it to make it so you don't cause somebody else to disappear. So I couldn't move all 3 of these and then leave all 4 damage tokens there, because that's not a legitimate thing to do. So the damage will follow you, but it's interesting, if there's fights up here, you can kind of come in and absorb the damage as you sort of retreat back into the sea of shadow players, because there can be so many up there that you just bring all the damage with you, and then you don't have to really worry about it too much. But that's the combat. You can also take rally actions later on to remove some of the damage as well. Now you can actually retreat. If you retreat and you did not play, let's find a regroup card. If you did not play a regroup card for your side, then you have to resolve damage till there's 0 or 1 damage token left. But if you were sort of anticipating that, you could play the regroup card and then retreat at the end of that round and not suffer that immediate resolving of casualties right there. Now the regroup card will also allow you to pick back up these cards that match the different units here. So that's the combat. I mean, and that is really the game, is you kind of move around, you roll action dice. That kind of limits your choices. You've got to kind of work your way around that. You play cards with those action dice, or do whatever the real kind of actions are. Then you move in, and the shadow player is really trying to take over territory, and the free peoples is just trying to hold on for dear life until one of these different timers kick in and they have the victory. Okay, so that is Battle of the 5 Armies, and I gave you kind of a basic core overview of what happens in the game, but I really honestly left a lot out. Now there's a lot of cool things. As I'm looking at over the components, I mean, one thing to note is you also have this cool arc that you can kind of see here, and the Gandalf or the freemen, the lakemen, can use this, and it's usually before the action phase. And you do this, and you get some damage, and you actually mark the range, on the table with the arc, and that's a pretty cool thing. And that's something you really kind of consider as you start to kind of learn the game and sort of the stages that the game's going to evolve in. Is like, okay, now we need to get some archers set up. You can just like lay an ambush, because they know that, okay, you need to go in here and you need to control these different choke points or these different locations to get the victory points, because that's what the shadow player has to do. So you can really set that up to try to ambush them and trap them. Of course, you're still subject to a dice roll, but so there's that kind of stuff. The recruitment tokens, I didn't talk about this. Those are put face down, and then you flip them up. So sometimes you might get, 2 dwarves or 2 orcs, and you might get a archer versus when you kind of wanted a dwarf. There's not really a problem with that. I think that's pretty cool, actually, because you get that sort of chaotic battlefield. It's like, hey, we need 4 people up here, and you're like, okay, like the first 4 people in the line, you don't know who they're going to be. They're going to run and help you, and they not necessarily a bunch of archers like you expected or something. So that's pretty cool. I actually like that. It kind of keeps things flavorful. There's a lot of detail in the cards, of course, and the different special abilities that you can do. And a lot of the subtleties are very nice about, I showed you the way the combat damage is resolved, the way the leadership abilities work and activating the generals. And because the way that the dice rolling works is anybody that has leadership, you're pretty much going to be able to do whatever you want with them. And then there are some die rolls that allow you just to move armies. You don't necessarily need leadership. So you're sort of telegraphing which units are going to be moving, but that's not always the case. It can be that you're able to move 2 groups of armies, based on a card play and stuff like that. So that kind of subtlety to the directions, the orders, and all that kind of stuff is really cool. I mean, it's like, okay, I've got the generals here, and I got to really activate these to hold that. And then, so I activate 2 or 3 generals, and then that gives the shadow player that much more, space to draw the fate tiles, and they have that much more information. And both sides kind of have the information, because the shadow players also have to put out the leadership. And you've got the bats, and then the eagles come in, and that's also a neat thing. That's another cool thing is, like, the combat system, in my opinion, is very, very solid and easy going, but then it's very well augmented by like flying units and, crazy bear units and orcs and different kinds of orcs. And Bilbo's got some cool things where he's able to like absorb damage and put the ring off and on, and then he kind of goes away after a little bit. And so it's got that solid core, but then you just wrap the theme around it, and it works very, very well. Yeah, I mean, I can go and equivocate about all this, like, okay, is it like War of the Ring? Well, I would say, if you have not played War of the Ring, get this one. See if you enjoy this one. This is a different game than War of the Ring. War of the Ring is like its own world. Like, there's no game like this. Now, this game is like a lot of war games or a lot of combat games, because it's just, it's a one big battle, and that's what it is. But it has similar mechanics to War of the Ring, and I love the whole dual-sided card thing. That's like the greatest thing ever in games, because it's just like, do I use this one? Okay, do I wait for this? Looks really good. Do I wait for later? And then you have that same sort of thought process with the dice. So that kind of thing goes through War of the Ring and goes through this. Now, this is much shorter. You can definitely play this in like 2 hours around that. Not much longer, not much shorter, really. War of the Ring is like a 4-hour game at least. I'm sure people can play in 3. I haven't played it enough to get that fast at it, but so if you like the system here, it's not a guarantee that you would like War of the Ring, and if you liked War of the Ring, you may not like this. I really don't know that they're that comparable. Like, they are, but they aren't, because it's a completely different thing. This is an 1.5 to 2 hour one battle, and War of the Ring is like this epic game that's not like any other game I've ever played in a lot of ways, because it's got battles and it's got different character movement. But this is a nice distillation, and I think it's a nice companion as well to War of the Ring. So I would say, back to my original point though, if you really are interested in a nice core and you like combat games, and they really did an amazing job, just the theme is stuck in with the mechanics, and they just kind of layer on. Gandalf acts like Gandalf would, and Bilbo does a thing that seems like what Bilbo would behave in this kind of game. So like the flying combat, really, really cool. So anyway, definitely take a look at this one. Oh, the other thing I was going to say, sorry, I'm forgetting something. Yeah, so this is interesting because it's an older game. I'm kind of late to the party. I mean, it's not old. It came out last year, but I'm like the last reviewer on Earth to review it or something. Anyway, but so this is up for the Dice Tower two-player game of the year award, and this is the one I voted for. And I was like, okay, well, let me wait a little bit and I'll review it. And I think they are going to announce that soon. All the votes have been cast, so whatever I say, obviously, not that it would make any difference anyway, but even if it would, it's too late. So, and I thought this last year actually turned out to be a very good year for two-player games last year. And I didn't get a chance to play this until this year. One of the reasons I got around to playing it and got off my butt was because it was nominated, and I felt like I wanted to be able to vote, and I really should play this game because it looks like a game that's up my alley. I liked War of the Ring, and this is the one I didn't end up voting for. But I actually had a hard time between this one and Imperial Assault because a lot of people don't think of that one as a two-player game, but I actually think it's best two-player because it's got the skirmish mode, and that's awesome. I really, really like that. And honestly, that was the hard thing for me going between this one and Imperial Assault. Because Imperial Assault has one thing where it's like you're going to come up with army after army, you're going to have all these different things, you can play it for a long time. It's like a little miniatures game. It's a smaller miniatures game, and you can expand it forever. And this is kind of a one-shot deal. So, you know, I kind of had to weigh that. And so I almost kind of flipped the coin, but I went with this one. And I think this is a good one. The other games that are nominated are Dice Masters, which I enjoyed, Warhammer, the Warhammer 40K Conquest LCG, and there's another one. And the other one I probably would vote for would be Warsindas Volk, but that wasn't nominated because nobody played that or heard of that. I did a review of that about a month or so ago. So all of those, I mean, if any of those win, except the Warhammer 40K one maybe, then, you know, I would be happy. I mean, if Dice Masters won, I'm like, that's a pretty good two-player game, you know, and Warsindas Volk is great. That would probably be my vote. But this one, I'd be more happy with this one. This is the one I voted for. So it really seemed like this would a good year for two-player games, and this would definitely go into my top 10 from last year. I would have to probably kick out, I think my number 10 was Golden Ages. So that would probably just mean swap there, because this one has just that extra richness of, you know, being able to sit down and just whack each other over the head, and the theme, like I said, is really woven in there. So this would definitely, it might even creep up a little bit in the top 10 from last year. And there was a couple other games that I played recently that were last year that would get in there. But this one for sure. So I just wanted to kind of, you know, elaborate a little bit on that point and how good I think the game really is. So anyway, take a look at it. Thanks.